Hi friends, today we are going to talk about how to purchase a farmland. I mainly wanted to share with you all my experiences in detail, and this is going to be a slightly longer video. Finding a suitable farmland takes time. Unlike traditional real estate, good leads are not readily available from online aggregators, and we need to depend on local middlemen. Unlike buying property in a city, it is not easy to visit multiple properties in one go. Visiting farmlands takes a lot of time as they are spread out over long distances. In my case, it took almost 3 years to find the right one. I spent many weekends roaming and searching. I must have seen at least 200 different farmlands in this 3 year period. We liked several properties, but there was always some or the other issue like no access to a road, the budget being too high, no water, or terrible soil. When everything fell in place, the legal checks would fail and we went back to square one. Today, I want to share with you some key topics to keep in mind before you purchase a farmland. We will discuss the following topics: location and accessibility, land characteristics, cost, due diligence, and fencing. First, location and accessibility. I am based out of Electronic City, which is situated in south of Bangalore. I was keen to find a land that was no more than 100 kilometers from my home so that we could reach there in about 2 hours. Bangaloreans in general are very comfortable commuting about 1.5 hours to office, and I thought 2 hours wasn't too bad. This also ensured that I stayed motivated to visit the farm at least once a week. Since we were in South Bangalore, we decided to narrow our choices to Tamil Nadu in areas around Hosur, Krishnagiri, and Dharmapuri. Given that we can read and write in Tamil, we could also understand all the land documents thoroughly. We were very keen to ensure that there was a tar road to the land. Tar road facing farmlands are very expensive in general, especially the ones that are closer to Bangalore are super costly. Initially, we were fine with access via mud roads, but most of them failed the legal checks as those roads were not having proper documentation of records. In fact, most of the time, they were shared by multiple landowners, which meant they were prone for litigation in future. So we decided to pay a premium and look out only for lands with a tar road access. Proximity to markets is another thing that we cared about. The nearest market from our current farmland is about 30 kilometers, which is Rayakote. We also wanted to ensure that there was people movement around the farm and that it was not too remote. We wanted the labor families to live on the farm peacefully and have access to a nearby village for shopping and other basic things. Next, let's talk about land characteristics. So there are several aspects to keep in mind here. First, land size. We were looking for 5 to 6 acres and ended up buying 5.21 acres. Infrastructure like internal roads, labor shed, cow fodder will all take up approximately half to 3/4 of an acre, which should still give us about 4 to 4.5 acres for cultivation. I personally think 3 acres is a good size. 2 cows should be sufficient for preparing Jivamritam and other menus for a 3-acre land. Pre-cultivated versus never cultivated. Pre-cultivated land is usually contaminated with chemicals unless you can find an organic farm, which is very rare and costly. But I don't think this is a major constraint. In 2 or 3 years, I strongly believe it is possible to fully convert this soil and make it free from synthetic chemicals. Water. It would be amazing to find a land with an existing water source like an open well or a bore well, but those lands tend to be on the expensive side. In my case, we did have a bore well, but it was not being used by the previous owner and there was no power connection either. With that said, it is important to talk to the neighboring farmers and inquire how deep their borewells are and get a general sense of water levels. If there are any water bodies like natural lakes, ponds, check dams, channels, or rivers, it is very likely that there's a good source of water underneath the soil. Power lines. It's best to avoid buying land where there is high tension wires. I'm not sure if there is a solid scientific evidence of electromagnetic radiation causing harm, but clearly there is a risk of electrocution and fire hazards caused by high tension wires. To be honest, such lands are generally cheaper and are very tempting to consider buying. But on the flip side, they also reduce the resale value of your land when you decide to sell. In short, it's best to avoid them. Electricity. It's important to consider the general availability of power supply in the area that you have shortlisted to buy the land. If you don't have a power line within a certain distance, you will end up paying the electricity department to erect poles and do the wiring, which will definitely not be cheap. Burial grounds and crematoriums. We should try and avoid buying land next to any burial grounds or crematoriums. Unlike the city, farmlands feel generally remote, especially at the night, things become a bit scary. Laborers who will stay in the farm are likely going to have some trouble staying in such farmlands. Although the existence of ghosts is a very debatable topic, there are psychological and sociological factors that contribute to the beliefs of people who will stay there, and it's important to take care of their well being. So we decided to drop such lands from our shortlist. Labor availability. The availability of laborers is also a very important thing to keep in mind. In general, agricultural workforce is shrinking and it's hard to find labor these days. Talk to any farmer and they'll highlight this as one of the most important challenges that they had to tackle. It's hard to mechanize everything on the farm, and there's always some or the other dependency on people. So, it is important to inquire about the labor availability in the vicinity. And it's also important to support the local communities as a successful farmer. Therefore, it's important to care about the people there. Quality of soil. In my view, soil testing may not necessarily be required. It is always possible to work with the soil, develop macro and micronutrients and organic content over time. So we were not too keen about testing the soil. We were okay as long as the soil was either red or black, which is prevalent in this area. With that said, we wanted to avoid the soil that appeared white because it lacks organic matter and generally it takes a very long time to make it suitable for cultivation. Topography. It's best to avoid farms with a lot of rocks. The more the rocks, the more it will cost to remove them, even though the land may be cheaper to buy. Usually, 4 to 5 feet depth of soil is more than sufficient to cultivate most type of crops. Having a reasonable slope is good, but an excessive slope could result in soil erosion and water runoff. Next, let's talk about cost. Cost is the most important consideration while buying a farmland. Farms closer to cities and better characteristics do tend to be expensive. If you find the price to be very cheap for what it offers, in other words, if it is too good to be true, it is very likely that there's some sort of a legal issue and it's best to avoid them. You can do a price benchmark by inquiring in the village. Usually, if you inquire as a buyer, the prices will tend to be on the higher side, and if you inquire as a seller, the prices are likely to be lower. So be sure to wear both the hats when studying the price and make reasonable estimates. Let's talk about middlemen. I think it's okay to engage with a land dealer, given that we don't find a lot of information online. The biggest learning from my experience working with agents is that they tend to show you anything and everything, exaggerate, waste time, and also take more money. So before they actually show you the land, there are multiple parties or agents usually involved, and they don't let you directly talk to the seller. So please be sure to set expectations in advance on your requirements and terms like brokerage, payment schedule, characteristics of the land, location, etc. Once the expectations are clear, it generally becomes easy to work with them and achieve a win-win for both. Let's talk about legal checks. Personal due diligence. It is important to do the basic due diligence yourself. Otherwise, it is going to cost you a lot of money to engage with a professional lawyer for each shortlisted property. So I try to learn a few basic things like the following. Encumbrance certificate, which shows whether the ownership of a property or land is free and clear of any legal or financial liabilities. It also provides a historical record of transactions. FMB or Field Measurement Book. This is a detailed map of a particular piece of land maintained by the government, usually at the village level. It has precise measurements, survey subdivision details, land features, and many more. Patta, Chitta, A Register, or Adangal, this is all specific to Tamil Nadu, but I'm sure there are similar things in other states. For example, in Karnataka, there's something called Katha. This document shows things like proof of ownership, land types, whether it's wetland or a dry land, and many other related details. And finally, land documents like sale deed or sale agreements provide valuable information like family tree, legal heirs, extent of the area, and other details. If you're satisfied with your basic due diligence, now it's time to work with a professional lawyer and conduct a thorough due diligence. Usually they charge based on the number of survey subdivisions and the complexity of the title of the document. It won't be cheap, but I think it's worth the peace of mind. Let's discuss a little bit about fencing. Fencing is the most important first step to be taken in the farm. In my case, we did a digital survey, which is generally more accurate than traditional surveys based on chain links. Although we did the survey, we only installed the corner posts before registration. And after the registration, when we started the fencing work, we discovered issues with neighbors and had to redo the survey. Eventually, the issues got settled, but it was a bit frustrating to go through all these issues. After all this learning, I just would like to suggest the following sequence of events. First, once you like the land, do the basic due diligence yourself. Then pay a token advance, conduct the professional legal check. Then, if possible, register a sale agreement by paying, let's say, 5% of the total price. After this, we could conduct a digital survey in presence of neighbors, VAO, which is the village administrative officer, seller, middleman, and basically everybody who was involved in the transaction. After the survey, completely finish the fencing work even though it will cost money before the final registration. And after the fencing work is done, make the final payment to the seller and if possible complete the registration the same day. So, in conclusion, it is important to realize that there is no perfect land. We need to be ready to accept trade-offs. Let's try to not compromise on the must-haves like clear titles, road access, water sources and fencing. But do please study the competing priorities thoroughly before taking any compromise and eventually making the investment. Hope you found this video helpful. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. If you have any questions, please leave them at the comments below. Thank you and happy farming.